So good to see you. Thank you for worshiping with us. If you're here with me at the campus, if you're watching online, welcome. My name's Jason, and most of you. It's just an honor that you'd spend a few moments of your day with us. We're in a series of messages that come from the letters that Paul wrote to Timothy in the backside of the New Testament called 1st and 2nd Timothy. Paul was a first-generation Christian, and then he's passing the baton of ministry to his pupil, his intern, his protege, his mentee, Timothy. And he's given it to him, and Timothy, in a very real way, as a second-generation follower of Christ, somebody who was saved from Paul's ministry. And it's a story, it's a question, it's a letter about the word faithfulness. If you're visiting with us, there's notes in the back of your bulletin. The question that we're laying as a lens, as kind of a script for this series, is what does it look like to be faithful in the time and place where God has placed us, time and space where God has placed us. Faithfulness is trusting God enough to do what he says and not quitting. It's the definition we've given. Faithfulness is trusting God enough to do what he says and not quitting. Faithfulness isn't a moving target. It doesn't depend on when you were born, where you were born, how you were wired, what part of the country, what part of the world. What we said as believers in 2018, faithfulness looks like it did for believers in 1918. Believers in China, faithfulness looks like it does for believers in Winder. The surrounding circumstances may be different, but faithfulness is faithfulness. It's not a moving target, and God sets the standard of what it means to be faithful. And all we're asking, the reason we're calling this series Generation is that we are a church that's multi-generation, which means every Sunday I talk to 5 different generations of people at once. All coming from different life paradigms, all coming from different perspectives, all coming from different places. And all we are asking, if we can be sober-minded enough as a church, be honest enough that we can ask the question, that is it possible that our faith, Bethlehem, what we call faithfulness, oftentimes is more informed by the times in which we live than it is the Christ in which we serve. That's all we're asking. As a mom, as a dad, as a follower of Jesus, that faithfulness at times is more informed by the times in which we live than it is the Christ in which we serve. Now, how many in the room are history buffs? Anybody raise your hand that just like history? Like, yeah, I'm not saying I'm going to give you a quiz. I know you are. Anybody else history buffs in the room? Right, a few of us, okay. A lot like I am, but just to get your mind going, maybe our mind racing, think about when you were in school. What was your favorite subject? Some of you were in school now, others of you not. Like when you were in school, what was your favorite subject and why? I'm gonna give you about 30 seconds. Person you came with, PE doesn't count, gentlemen, okay? Lunch doesn't count, okay? But what was your favorite subject in school? If you're in school, what's your favorite subject and why? 30 seconds, go. Now mine was history. How many math people do we have in the room? I just love math, right? All day long, that's been the favorite. What is wrong with you? Science, biology, right? History. Nobody likes English, and so, oh, you do? Okay, sorry. So nobody likes that. What's been fascinating to me is actually, and it serves me well that I like history since I communicate for a living, but what's fascinating to me is not just history, but the history of the church. The history of the movement of Jesus. Because what is really fascinating to me is at the time Jesus was crucified, do you realize there were just a handful of followers of Jesus? They weren't even referred to as Christians as then. They were called followers of the way. That Christianity at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus was at best an obscure, marginal movement. Few hundred at best at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. In fact, a book that I've enjoyed over time is a book by a guy named Rodney Stark called The Rise of Christianity. How an obscure, marginal Jesus movement became the dominant religious force in the Western world in just a few centuries. And in it, he puts a chart. And this is not scientific and exactly, but this is based on history and our best understanding of population at the time. Here's what he says. The year 40 AD, all right, so, about 1,000 Christians, maybe some more. And he kind of traces the growth of Christians and the population density, the percentage that it made up. And I want you to pay attention. Timothy, 1st and 2nd, was written about right here, 65 AD, to the best of our understanding. To the best of able to but look right here at 150 and at 250, the jump that's made, right? It's right here, 150 to 250. I mean, look at that, 150 to 200. I mean, that's, and then look at this from 250 to 300, the percentage. And so you sit there as a historian, not that I am one, but you go, what in the world's going on then? For just the movement to take that much force. And what you find is that the world was plagued at this time with great epidemics. In 150, smallpox literally took hundreds of thousands of people in a few-year time span. In 250, a flu-like virus that there was no vaccination or treatment for literally took hundreds of thousands of people. And what is interesting is Dionysius, who was a historian at the time, noted that though for about 260 AD, when he writes this letter, here's what he said. He noted that the vast majority of the population at the time, because of the sickness and the epidemic, was vast and immense, was scared to death. In fact, he said other faith systems at this time were called into question. But he said Christians greeted the epidemic merely, in his writings, as schooling and testing. Because what they believed called them to action. Then in a letter he writes, chronicling the heroic efforts of the early Christ followers in this epidemic. Here's what he says. Most of our brother Christians showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. And with them departed this life serenely happy, for they were infected by others with disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbors and cheerfully accepting their pains. Come on. Many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their death to themselves and died in their stead. The best of our brothers lost their lives in this manner. A number of presbyters, pastors, deacons, and laymen and women, winning high commendation, so that death in this form, the result of great piety and strong faith, seems in every way the equal of martyrdom. The aim of our faith, the aim of this letter is love, Paul writes to 1st and 2nd Timothy, that's seen in a sincere faith, in a good conscience, and in a pure heart. Belief is always seen in action. Everything else is window dressing. To borrow a phrase from my military brothers and sisters, let me tell you why the Christian movement exploded. Because the Christ followers were the first boots on the ground in the middle of heartache and sickness, and they were the last man out. Paul says the reason I'm writing this is love. The early church exploded, listen to me, when what other people ignored or avoided or tried to escape, the believers ran headfirst into. They gave themselves to doing hard things. Now, what you will find as you study the history of the church, the movement of Christianity that you and I are a part of, is disease never slowed down the movement of Jesus throughout history. Pandemic, epidemic, you study it, never slowed down the movement of Jesus. Persecution, and it has faced great persecution, never slowed down the movement of Jesus. In fact, even persecution today in parts of India, parts of China, parts of the Middle East, where our brothers and sisters in Christ literally face persecution for their belief, the gospel advances like wildfire. Do you know what the gospel movement, the movement of Jesus, has always struggled with? Prosperity. And Paul talks about this to his young protege, Timothy. at the end of his first letter. Is prosperity in and of itself evil? No. Paul's actually going to speak of this, and that's a good thing. We'll see it in a moment, because if that was true, we would all be up a creek. And just to level the playing field with this word on the screen, let me kind of go ahead, and as you begin to argue with me in your mind, let me go ahead and set you at ease. Although we may all come from different financial backgrounds and have different financial realities, we, compared to the rest of the world at any time in history, are the most prosperous people. In fact, just to level the playing field, if you make a household income of $25,000 or more, you make more than 90% of the rest of the world's population right now. So I'm not making light. Some of us are under real financial pressure. I'm just saying as a whole, can we own, we are prosperous to any standard the history of the world has ever known. And here's the problem with prosperity. Prosperity tends to change the definition of faithfulness. And I put this in your notes. In prosperity, in great wealth, we tend to see faithfulness through the lens of our standard of living more than God's call to be the first to sacrificially give. That we understand faithfulness through our standard of living, i.e. how it works or how it affects us, more than God's call to sacrificially give. Faithfulness mysteriously changes, church, when you deal with prosperity. Prosperity is more than money. It's a mindset. So take a deep breath for a second, because today doesn't end in me ending with a spill for you to give more money to the church. So for all of you that already began to argue with me in your mind, going, here he goes, take a deep breath. Not going there. Because why? There are many people in this room who are obedient and they're generous. They trust God with their first and their best. And Bethlehem is blessed. This is me saying, let's just have a really honest conversation for a moment of what it looks like to be faithful in prosperity. Because the church has always struggled with that. The movement of Jesus. 1 Timothy 6. Paul writes and says this in verse 3. If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the teaching that accords with godliness, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. He has an unwealthy craving for controversy and for quarrels about words which produce envy, dissension, slander, evil suspicions, and constant friction among people who are depraved in mind, deprived of truth. And here it is, this is so good. Making up in their head that godliness is a means of gain. So when the church is birthed in Ephesus, where Timothy's pastoring, it was a wealthy city in the ancient world, the third wealthiest in the Roman Empire. So Paul says in verse 17, there were some people that were rich in this present age. They already had much and they received Jesus. Here's the crazy thing, and they became more wealthy after following Jesus. Go figure, they began to manage their households and their budgets, and they began to see life different. And they gained in wealth. Crazy enough, if you can believe it, character, wisdom, integrity, honesty went a long way. But here's what happened. So what begins, remember the movement of Jesus is very young. Some begin to teach kind of a quasi-prosperity gospel, which was this. Look, this following Jesus is really cracked up to be awesome because we're Jesus followers and we're more rich. They're imagining that godliness is a mean of gain. It's not the gospel. It's, oh yeah, Jesus, but you also do pretty well financially. Got a lot of that going on today, don't we? It's neither here nor there. Verse 6, here's what Paul writes. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Underline that in your Bibles. Godliness with contentment is great gain, because we didn't bring anything to the world. We can't take anything out of it, but if we get food and clothing with this one, we'd be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmless desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Here's what he says. The love of money, not money, but the love of money, we all know this, is the root of all kinds of evil. Of all kinds of evil. As for the rich in this present age, skip down to verse 17. Charge them not to be haughty. So rich, I'm not telling you they're wrong, but if they're rich, tell them don't be bragging about it. Nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They're to do good, underline this, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so they may take hold of that which is truly life. The word contentment here is key. He says with more wealth comes more temptation. Paul would argue, and he teaches that wealth is not a sin, which is a big deal. Because you get into Jesus' words about money, and some of us will get real uneasy. So Paul comes back and clarifies some things and says, wealth's not a sin. It's an immense responsibility. A man or woman's opportunity to do good to others increased with abundance. Increased with the abundance of his riches, but so does temptation. So our opportunity to do good, Paul says, is leveraged because of wealth, but so is temptation. In fact, write this down. Our wealth has a purpose, church, and it's not the endless pursuit of more. And that's the challenge of our day that we all live under, me included. So I'm not preaching to you, I'm talking about what I wrestle with just like you. The challenge of our day is the acquisition of more. J. Paul Getty was once described, 40s, 50s, and 60s, as the world's most wealthy private citizen. Today, that's referred to as Jeff Bezos, the founder, starter of Amazon, right? Which is basically like the biggest business in the world right now. That was once J. Paul Getty. He invested and was an oil tycoon, and he was known for his frugality. In fact, this Christmas, there was a movie released that chronicles a part of his life called All the Money in the World. And it was released chronicling a piece of his life where his grandson was kidnapped and he was the wealthiest man in the world, but he would not pay his ransom. Mark Wahlberg starred in it. It came out this Christmas. There's a clip that's a preview that you saw all over everything as they kind of previewed the movie. And I thought the clip was informative at a conversation he and Mark Wahlberg, who plays kind of his security guard, has when it comes to paying the ransom for his grandson. Take it away.
They will do things to Paul that cannot be undone for any amount of money. We have to pay.
Well, this simply isn't possible. My financial position has changed.
Really? 30 seconds ago you said it was a good day. I'm not all that bright, but I can multiply as well as you. With oil up as much as it was this morning, you have amassed another fortune.
Well, what if the embargo is lifted and oil were to crash? I'd be exposed. I have never been more vulnerable financially than I am right now.
Mr. Getty, with all due respect, nobody has ever been richer than you are at this moment.
I have no money to spare.
What would it take? What would it take for you to feel secure?
More.
Now that's a pretty extreme example. You can read about the man's life. It's pretty well historically documented. But that's what materialism and prosperity does to us. It numbs us. It numbs our reasoning. And I'm just going to raise my hand as a representative like I have all day at all of our campuses. I think we are numb to the effect prosperity and materialism has on us. I just think we are. And we just have to own it. Because here's the deal. Although we would go, that's crazy, I'd never do that. Do you realize most Americans, if not many, maybe not most, many Americans live under constant financial pressure? Right, like paycheck to paycheck, credit card to credit card, bill to bill, living on 110% of their income. Why? And here's what nobody will ever say. We all go, yeah, people do that. Here's what we don't say, so I'm just going to say it. Most of that financial pressure is self-imposed. What do you mean? People made decisions they wanted to make with their finances, not that they had to make. And so what happens is you have a lot of Jesus followers who I think honestly love Jesus. And they want to make much of his mission and the call of Jesus on their life, but they're so much under the pressure of staying ahead and keeping their head above water. It's not that Jesus' mission doesn't matter, it's just they're trying to stay ahead. Obedience to the Great Commission has more consistently been poisoned by affluence more than anything. Throughout history, it's been poisoned by affluence. So Paul says, Timothy, godliness with contentment is great gain. That word contentment, not a word we use a lot, a word we understand. Church, faithfulness and prosperity, here's the word I would bring you to, contentment. Think about that question. Am I content? Is my family content? Like Nan and I know that's got to be a high value for us raising a family, because the world our kids are raised in isn't going to scream at them, be content. And we wrestle with what it is to be content. Well, Jason, I mean, think about it. Contentment's this idea of an inner security that keeps us at peace no matter what our outward circumstances are. That's contentment. We all know what we're talking about when we say contentment. So my question is, am I a content person? Are you content? Think about it. Well, just in your own, I mean, are you a content person? Well, I mean, Jason, you don't have to get all personal here. I mean, I think I am. Right? I mean, I'm blessed, no doubt about it, man. I've got a lot of blessings, not what I asked. There's a whole lot of people blessed, and they know they're blessed, but they're not content. Are you content? Well, Jason, I mean, I'm happy. I mean, life's not always easy, but I'm happy. And I think we got it pretty good, so I'm happy. So yeah, no. But here, I didn't ask if you were happy. I hope you are. But there's a lot of people who would say, I think I'm fairly happy, but they're not content. Well, Jason, I mean, okay, I got a lot. We have a lot of stuff, so yes, we're content. Listen. There's a lot of people with a lot of stuff that aren't content. Come on. Think about that question. Content. Everything in our culture pushes against it. Here's why contentment matters. Here's why I say that. Contentment's not intuitive, it's learned. It's learned. Paul is telling Timothy, part of being faithful witnesses, you've got to teach people to be content. And let me tell you why I know contentment is learned. Because Paul, the apostle, I would contend the greatest Christian outside of Jesus, because Jesus' name was Christ, he gets the, Christian, okay? And so the greatest Christian outside of him, Paul, the missionary that expanded the church globally, here's what he says in Philippians 4. I am speaking, now that I'm speaking of being need, not that I am speaking, for I have, here's the word, what is it? Learn. Oh, let's say it again, not all of you got it. For I have, in whatever situation I am, to be content. Here's what's interesting. He says that while he's rotting in prison. I've learned to be content. See, I was talking to Jeremy, our worship leader, Joel, and I've had the same conversation, talking about musicians a couple of weeks ago. And he goes, Jason, there's two types of musicians. We have great bands in all of our campuses, all of our environments, and two types of musicians. There are learned musicians and musicians that are born with it. We have both of them. By born with it means they can just kind of hear, play, pick up. You're like, man. By learned, it means they take lessons, or they really have to work at it. They have to practice at it. They're good, but right. That's kind of any skill, any talent. Some people just born with it. Some people just have to learn it. I'm more on the side of learning. Anybody with me? I'm more on the side of having to learn things. That's just me. Let me be very clear. Nobody is born content. You have to learn it. Your sin nature, you're born with this desire of not being content with myself, nor am I content with other people, nor am I content with the world around me. You got to own that. Like, it's just easy to go, oh yeah, I'm content, while there's a wrestling going on inside of us that drives our decisions that we become so used to, we just call it human. Like, do you remember the late 90s, early 2000s, the comedian, some of you, he did a little stand-up, Jeff Foxworthy, You Might Be a Redneck If. Anybody remember that? You might be a redneck if. Well, let me flip that. You might be discontent if. I'll give you two practical examples. You decide to make something essential beyond the need for food, clothing, and shelter. Paul says if we got food, if we got clothes, if we're eating, don't we got everything we need? Now, I'm going to raise my hand. I have more than food, clothing, and shelter. So I'm going to raise my hand for you, so do you. Does that mean you're wrong or bad? No, it just means it is what it is. What I am saying, though, is the danger, what Paul is trying to tell Timothy, is be aware of the gradual shift in perspective that happens when you label something in your head essential besides food, clothing, and shelter. That's not in dispute. We all need that. But when you label something as essential, what happens is you become a slave to it. You become bound by it. So when in my head as a parent, it's essential to have a bigger house so all of my kids can have their own bedroom. That's what drives me to raise my standard of living. Well, I can't let them drive that car with 70,000 miles on it. We need to drive a car that's essential. Is it? Or do you want it? Just say it. But we have a way of labeling something as essential. And all Paul is saying, that contentment understands if I have everything I need, listen, let's be very careful at what I label essential. Here's another one. You might be, not a redneck, but discontent if you decide to make increased income the primary focus of your vocation. Like, I hope you got a job and I hope it pays well. Or at least it pays you what you deserve. But our society, especially for men, I think it's true for ladies too, has reduced a job or a career to a paycheck. I cannot tell you how many people in 20 years of ministry I have sat with, how many families where the husband has bombed his job that he had. Why? Because he was looking over his shoulder at the job he wanted that paid more, and he ruined the job that he was in because he wasn't doing the job that he was called to do or had the opportunity to do. But that's what we just call American climbing the ladder. Always looking over. Nothing wrong with making it, but at some point, is your skills, is your gifting, is your talent, when have we become so low of humanity to reduce everything to this? And it sounds weird why I say that, so you argue with me in your head. Be careful, because what you and I call ambition, Scripture sometimes calls discontent. Right? It's just a real conversation. Our social media, consumerism, marketing, all built on it. And here's all I want to say. This is the whole talk right here. And then I want to share what the Lord's brought me through for us as a church. The illusion that we live under, that Paul is trying to break Timothy out of, trying to help lead this church, is we think contentment is a place that one day we will arrive. When the kids get older, when I go from 40 to 80,000, right? When I've got a little bit more margin, we think it's a place that we're going to arrive. It's not. We think it's a standard that we're going to achieve. You won't. It's an accomplishment we're going to attain. It is an illusion. And many people are disillusioned in discontentment. Why? Here's the whole thing. This is everything. Contentment's not something we find. It is something we decide. That's everything. Whoo! That's all Paul's saying. You got to let me tell you when you're thankful when you decide it. That's it. Let me tell you when you're satisfied with your income, when you make that decision to be. Let me tell you when you give, when you're generous. Here's when it is, when you decide to. Contentment's not somewhere you're going to arrive. It's nowhere to be found in the Scripture. It's a decision you're going to make. And that's not only true for us as individuals, but I think it's true for us as a church. Like, what does it look like to be content? Because Paul says, the world says to be rich in what you have, but he says, flip that and be rich in good works. So he says, lead your church to be rich in good works. So God's had me on a journey for 2 years that I haven't shared with many people. Our elder board's been in on it. And it's just been a wrestling of what does it look like to lead Bethlehem Church to be content. Have an inner sufficiency that we have a peace no matter what the outside world does. Corporately as a body, but also individually. Content. Right? Because on every level, and I get to say this because I'm the pastor and I have to stand before God and give account for this church. We are a blessed and prosperous church on no matter how you compare it, we are. The people's skills in this room, the talent watching me online, the resources God has given us and with it we call, I am saying this, we are blessed, we are prosperous. And here's what God has reminded me of. Listen, with great blessing comes great responsibility. I think it's true for you as an individual. With great blessings, not about the acquisition of more, it comes great responsibility. And that's been true for us, that God has over and over, as our church has just rapidly gone from A to B to C to D in like no time. The whole thing, the Lord's been going, what does it look like to lead and be content, to be rich in good work? So globally, if you remember, how many of you here last fall, we had Compassion Weekend? And many of you went through that experience. Raise your hand. Compassion, they had the tents out front, right? We talked about and began to launch the vision of what does it look like. And we have a lot of missionaries doing a lot of good work. 2 of them were here from Vienna today. Prayed with them, got to talk with them, have some others. But we kind of picked a spot in Brazil, partnering with Compassion International called Cadeau. And you guys adopted, and by adopted, I mean sponsored, like $38, $39 a month. Kids put food on 1 square meal a day. You put clothes on their back, and you paid for their schooling. And at the end of last year, we sent $30,000 to Compassion International to help launch a church where many of these kids will attend school, they will get to eat, and they will be taught the gospel. You guys, over 600 kids, you sponsored that. So here's the cool thing. I'm letting you know our first mission trip is coming November 3rd through the 10th of this year, to the spot where we sponsored children, right? And you'll get to meet some of the kids you sponsored November 3rd through the 10th. We're going to Brazil. Why? We want to be rich in good works, to joyfully and abundantly bless a different part of the globe than just us. You guys rose to the challenge. Huge, huge, huge. You can mark it on your connection card, by the way. Right? And some of you are like, dude, there's only like 20 or 30 spots and there's a whole lot more people, but we're going to be going every year. So if you miss this year, it's okay. You can go another year. Fantastic. But as a whole, there is no question this church is generous. You've proven that. But here's what the Lord's been messing with me on. Sometimes being generous is not just about being a blessing. It's about being intentional in how you bless. What do you say? See, I heard a pastor tell me about a year ago, and I wrote it down, and this is my words to kind of what he said. But he said, Jason, finding armies of people to volunteer on one Saturday per year to paint a dilapidated house, that's easy. It's important, no doubt about it. Where we can help, we should help. But it's just not hard with the amount of people that we have. Let me say it again. Finding armies of people to volunteer on one Saturday per year to paint a dilapidated house is easy. But and this is where the Lord just has not let me go. Finding people to love the people day in and day out who live in those houses is extremely difficult. Don't be broadly generous. Be intentional. The early church exploded when they did hard things. With great blessing comes great responsibility. God has continually said, Jason, lead the people, lead Bethlehem Church to do the hard stuff. So 2 realities I've had to wrestle with. 1, no one church can do everything, because when you begin trying to do everything, you don't do anything any good. Okay? So that's 1. And we are a church that's regional in nature. So by that, I mean we pull significantly from 5 different counties. Barrow, obviously, Walton, obviously, Gwinnett, Jackson, and one other, Oconee. And by significantly, I mean quite a few families come from all, so regional in nature. But our backyard has always been, we've seen first is Barrow County, although we've begun some partnerships in other counties that you'll begin to hear about in the days ahead. It's always been. And the truth of the matter is, our community has a whole lot of systemic inherent issues. Every community does. What are systemic inherent? Like issues of people issues that were there before you got there, and there's a good chance they'll be there after you're gone because it's just part of that community. Systemic and inherent issues. Everyone does. And what drives me crazy and what the Lord has done is, here's what most people do. What do you mean systemic and inherent issues? People and situations that is easy to ignore or avoid. And so what happens most of the time when you're dealing with hard things in the community, poverty, addiction, homelessness, things that there are not easy answers for. What happens most of the time is we go, well, man, isn't that the government? I pay taxes. Come on, man, whoa. And at some point, is it not the people of God who are called to do the hard things? The Lord just has not let me go with this. Do hard things. So I met with a group a few months back, or about 18 months ago, because the other reality was, if I look at leading Bethlehem Church to take on the hard things, if I see us as a corporate body, put yourself in my shoes for a second. Like what happens is when you get into working in community issues, oftentimes roadblocks happen for churches. Why? Because of separation of church and state realities. Just does. They're just roadblocks that you run into because we're a faith entity. And some of you look and you shake your head and go, well, it shouldn't be that way. I'm not saying it shouldn't. It is. It's just the way it is. But if I see Bethlehem Church as a group of individuals who've been changed by Jesus instead of just a corporate body, the opportunities are endless. So I met with this group 18 months ago and I said, what does it look like in the next season, 20, 30, 40 years from now, that when we're all gone from here? What does it look like for Bethlehem Church, the people there, to be enabled and empowered to take on the hard things, to be rich in good works? I said, I want you to spend the next 6 months. We've got some great nonprofits in our community already that we already sponsor. Peace Place, Treehouse, Barrel Ministry Village, Boys and Girls Club. I could list off and on and on and on. You guys, but not every nonprofit can take on every issue. I said, what are some of the systemic, inherent issues that are at our back door that nobody has a good answer for? They came back and they said, Jason, what would it look like for us to launch out of Bethlehem Church a nonprofit that's sole mission was to simply tackle the hard issues that nobody else has answers for? Something that is not bound by the church, but it's empowered by the church. And at the end of the last year, this group came from our church and we launched New Path. Their website launches this weekend, New Path 1010, 1010 for John, 1010, all you out there. Those of you that come to have life, I've come that you may have life and have it to the fullest. Let me read you what they exist for. New Path 1010 exists to be a bridge to a broken community. By ending the cycles of systemic poverty, by showing those in need a new path of life that affirms the intrinsic value and places them in a position to become a productive member of the community. Let me translate into really simple English. People that it's easy to ignore and avoid, what if our church runs to them? Let me make it even easier. What if the people of God are empowered outside of just the local church of Bethlehem and New Path? And here's the whole thing. Let me translate this. Write this down on your paper. New Path exists to do hard things. To do hard things. All right? And so as they began to talk, meeting with a lot of different officials, a lot of different areas, there's going to be many things that you will hear this group take on. I'm not naming their names because they wouldn't want me to. They would not care if I did. But a nonprofit that exists to simply do this. And so what we did is, in the last year, you guys give so generously, we gave $30,000 to help them get off the ground and simply said, you help me find, right? You find a hard issue to take on and let's see what happens. So in talking to a whole lot of different people, they came back and here's what they said. One of the greatest issues of need in our community came from the Barrow County school system. Just listening to what their needs were, food insecurity and homelessness rose to the top. So let me give you some staggering stats. Over 400 students in the Barrow County school system, our backyard, are classified as homeless under federal regulation. These are students of all ages, some teenagers on their own and some single parent or two parents. Now, the definition of homeless doesn't mean they live in the woods. Many of them live on the couches or the sofas of friends to get by because they're displaced and don't have a place to call home. In our community, Barrow County School System is currently serving 216 students through the school year on a weekly basis through the Food to Kids program. And what they do is send a bag of food home with these students every Friday to get them through the weekend. This program costs the school system roughly $60,000 per school year. And here's the crazy thing, and the funds are derived mainly from the school system staff members. So overworked, underpaid teachers. Any teachers know what I'm talking about? Everywhere. Our teachers here. Overworked, underpaid. I just own that. I get it, right? That's just the plot of a teacher. Many of them giving to make this happen. At the beginning of the school year, they've identified 85 more students who would qualify this program, but the resources aren't there. And here's what New Path did. They looked at them and said, what would it look like for us to take that on? The Food to Kids program, we just take it on. What do you mean? Beginning next year, we'll end this year, beginning next year, New Path. It's nonprofit that simply wants to go after tackling hard issues that are not easy to solve. We'll place 2 food pantries in cooperation in 2 Barrow County public schools to provide food for kids that don't have food, with the plan in the next 2 years to cover all 17 schools in our school system, right? How cool is that? It's big, way bigger than Bethlehem Church. A group of people saying, what does it look like to do hard things? The contents of this bag will look similar, right? Will look similar to what the Food to Kids program has done. But on top of that, there will be notes of encouragement, words of affirmation for these students that don't have any voices in their life, for us to come beside them, for New Path to come beside them and to speak life, to lead them toward a different life. Church, in 2018, do not miss this. The people of God should run to the point of greatest need and say, how can we help? We have to be that. That is the call. And listen, I want to say this. I've said this all day. You need to understand the next 2 years at Bethlehem Church. You better get this next statement through your head. To reach, especially if you've been in church too long, okay? To reach and influence people. Nobody else is reaching and influencing. We have to be willing to do and try things nobody else is trying. We have to. And so I love it. From generation to generation, the people of God, when they run to the greatest point of need and crisis, to say, how can we help? The kingdom of God advances. So how can I help, Jason? It's a great question. If you look, when you came in with your bulletin, you got this right here. What we want to do as a church is help come alongside New Path to help them get off the ground. We've already financially made that possible. When you came in, you got a kind of a food list between now and May the 27th, which is Memorial Day weekend. So none of you come then, so you better bring this before then, okay? I'm not bitter, but if you do, you're really godly, okay? I'll be here. But listen. No, wounded pastor. Nobody, but by this date, we need you to bring a bag of food in so we can give this to New Path to help them begin to stock, to help kids as they go home for the summer that are already in this program to be ready for next school year. Now, normally at Walk Through Bethlehem, which is our Christmas initiative, we have bags outside that say Bethlehem Church. We don't this time. Here's what I'm saying. You can get a bag, okay? If you can't, ask us. We'll find you a plastic bag. Fill it up with food and bring it back in the next month. And here's the other thing. On your connection card, we will give your information to New Path 1010 so you can look and say, man, I'd love to be involved in helping some of these. This is just the beginning. Again, there's a ton of great nonprofits doing good work. All New Path is looking at saying, what is it being addressed that we can go after? What are hard things that we can come alongside people and speak life? The people that it's easy to ignore, the people that it's easy to avoid, the issues in our community that it's easy to look past and go, that's somebody else's problem. All New Path is doing is saying, what does it look like to run to those and say, how can we help? And all I'm trying to do this weekend is help them get off the ground. Why? A content church should be rich in good works. Oh, we've got much. I've got to stand before God one day. You know that? You don't have to. Well, you do have to. But you don't have to on behalf of Bethlehem Church. I do. I got to stand before God one day. And as your pastor, I cannot let us to change the standard of faithfulness to revolve around our standard of living. It's got to be about people that are content running to the scene of the crime, running to the scene of the hardest things, not living in our white picket fence and our cul-de-sac lots and just hoping the world doesn't affect us, but going, what does it look like to come alongside? See, here's what I've wrestled with, this statement right here, and I'm done. My service will not be judged on how much I've done, but how much I could have done. We're blessed. This is an opportunity. And my question to you is, as a family, do you know what it looks like to be content? It's not a place you're going to find. It's something you're going to have to decide. Do you know what faithfulness and prosperity revolves around this one word right here? Contentment. Our culture fights against it, and the gospel champions it. Will you stand with me all over this room and let me pray for you?